Hey, everybody. If you're watching this, you're quite aware of the controversy between President Trump and the Trump administration not willing to concede the election just yet. And I want to emphasize something. Yes, definitely recount the votes. Go through the process just as I wanted Hillary Clinton's team to go through the process in 2016. I think Senator McConnell is absolutely right. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? But once the courts toss out the lawsuits, then concede. Because right now, according to this right here, the Presidential Transition Act of 1963, which was amended in 2010, Joe Biden and his transition team, or at least the beginnings of what will be his transition team, have the right to legally occupy offices that should have been set aside for them by the General Services Administration. That's right. This is the Presidential Transition Act. And what it reads, I'm not going to take you through the whole thing, but I'm going to take you through enough of it so that you get an understanding of what's going on here. What this says is that the Congress said in 63 that any disruption occasioned by the transfer of the executive power could produce results detrimental to the safety and well-being of the United States and its people. To promote the orderly transfer of power, Congress established a framework for the federal government to prepare for a transition from one president to another. And if you want to see this URL, I'm going to place this in this area right here so that it appears. And here it is right here. It's a script file that's marked in the chat field, scrib.com/document. Basically, just search Presidential Transition Act Summary, look for Zenny 62 and Scribd, and you'll see it. You'll find it online. There it is. Okay. This is the Presidential Transition Act copy. And it has been amended over the years, as this verbiage says, but I'm going to go all the way down to what's supposed to be done. For example, some things you may have already heard by now. 6 months before an election, the president must establish a White House Transition Coordinating Council. That's what it says, okay? Chaired by a senior employee, the executive office, and consisting of other higher level officials. And then the act requires a standing agency transition directors council co-chaired by the General Services Administration, that's GSA, Federal Transition Coordinator, and the Office of Management and Budget's Deputy Director for Management, including agency senior career officials responsible for transitioning activities as well as transition representative of the major candidates. This working level council works toward an integrated government-wide approach to transition and ensures that briefing materials are prepared, okay? Then it goes on, and this discusses the role of the General Services Administration. It says the act requires the GSA to provide office space and administrative support, such as information technology and communications abilities to a president-elect, this is in cases Biden, okay? And Vice President-elect Harris, Kamala Harris, and recognize a growing need for transition activities to start well before Election Day. The act also requires the GSA to offer office space and support to major candidates in the months preceding the election, following the political conventions. In the post-election period, the GSA is also authorized to pay expenses for staff, experts, postage, and travel for the transition team of the president-elect. If the president-elect is not a president who has been reelected, if the president-elect is not a president who has been reelected, use of government aircraft may also be provided on a reimbursable basis. And the GSA is designed to be a liaison between the transition teams and the federal government, helping to ensure that the president-elect is a beachhead team is cleared to enter each agency and be on the job immediately after Inauguration Day. The law requires the GSA administrator to designate a senior career official to serve as the federal transition coordinator, And there's a lot of other details here. So here's some other questions, like how does the act help with the transition related to national security? It says the act directs the FBI and other agencies to conduct those investigations expeditiously with the goal of providing appropriate security clearances for the individuals that are involved. And then it says this separately, the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004 allows each eligible candidate before the election to submit security clearances requests. And it says what requirements are placed on recipients of transition assistance. And it says as a condition of receiving office space, the president-elect and the vice president-elect are required to disclose to the GSA all non-federal contributions received for transition activities. And the transition team must also disclose to the public the identities and sources of funds of individuals who enter federal agencies after the election as part of the president-elect's transition team. And it says, well, how are they funded? Presidential transitions are funded through a combination of federally approved funds and private funds. Congress provides $9.62 million for transition activities. The president has requested $9.9 million for activities in fiscal year 2021 for Biden. To accept private funding, an eligible candidate must establish an entity, a nonprofit that's legally separate under Section 501c4 of the Internal Revenue Code. Okay, so here we get to the interesting questions. What happens with if a president is reelected? Doesn't apply. But what happens if the result of the election is unclear? Does. And that is what gets us to where we are right now. The law provides that an eligible candidate, okay, it says it right here in black and white. Let me enlarge this because I know it's small print over there. But let me zoom in, okay, and then zoom in again here, and then scroll down so that you can read this clearly, all right, and without any room for confusion, okay? Right here, what happens if the result of the election is unclear? And let me see if I can enlarge that yet again, even bigger. And it looks like I can, but I have to scroll down again because we lost our center, didn't we? And so in seconds here, we are right there. Okay. What happens right there? What happens if the result of the election is unclear? All right. What happens if the result of the election is unclear? And again, let's read that again. What happens? Okay. What happens if the result of the election is unclear? What happens if the result of the election is unclear? It's a good question. It says the law, and I'm highlighting it in green here, all right? And I'm repeating it so that you can remember it. It says the law provides that an eligible candidate has the right to the facilities and services provided to eligible candidates until the date on which the administrator is able to determine the apparent successful candidates for the office of president and vice president. Got that? Okay. Let's see. Let's read that again. Okay. It says it's quite clear there. All right. It says in terms of what it says. Okay. It says the law provides that an eligible candidate has the right to the facilities and services provided to eligible candidates until the date on which the administrator is able to determine the apparent successful candidates for the office of president and vice president. And what that means, very simply, is that President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris, hey, have the right to the facilities that they're supposed to be using, like right now. Okay? Right now. All right? They're the eligible candidates. That's what it says. The law provides that. It doesn't say, oh, you have to wait. It doesn't say, oh, this isn't, for you. No, it doesn't say anything like that. It's quite clear. Biden and Harris and their transition team have the right to enter their facilities pronto, right now. That's what it reads. That's what it reads. So let's go a step further in this controversy, having now that you've seen that, okay? Let's go say, and all right, this is the timeline and requirements ongoing. GSA designates a transition coordinator, develops a transition directory, agency transition director councils meet. This has been ongoing. Then 12 months before the election, GSA produces summarizing modern transition activities. Then 6 months, there's a whole slew of things. President establishes a White House Transition Coordinating Council. They did do that. I'll get to that in a second. In fact, let me just continue. And it says that not later than September, the GSA enters memorandums of understanding with eligible candidates. Then, not later than September 15th, heads of agencies ensure succession plans are in place. Not later than October 1st, the GSA negotiates memorandums of understanding with transition teams, including agreements. And not later than November 1st, the Agency Transition Directors Council ensures that transition briefing materials are prepared. And then post-election, if there is a change in administration, on the day following the election, which is this week, the GSA is to begin to provide office space and support services to the president-elect and vice president-elect, with supporting continuing up to 60 days after inauguration next year. Then you're supposed to get a classified summary regarding national security, okay? And then 30 days for the expiration of the term, the GSA begins support to ongoing president and vice president, with support continuing for 7 months. Got that? Okay. Now, I want you to see something here. Here's where everything gets a little screwed up in the mix, okay? And this has been screwed up in the mix not by accident. It has been screwed up in the mix by design. This comes to us by a publication by the name of Government Executive and a post written by Courtney Boble on May 15th, as you can see here, May 15th of 2020, entitled Trump Administration Details Efforts to Support Peaceful Presidential Transition. Watchdog groups point to significant ethics problems among some of the White House Transition Coordinating Council members. Let's just get this. Look at this. I'm going to highlight this. May 15th. See that? May 15th, 2020. See that? All right. And that's Courtney right there, as you can see. Okay. Then it goes on to read this. This is very important. Pay attention, 007. The General Services Administration is preparing office space for the Commerce Department. Remember, this is May 15th, 2020. For the 2020 Democratic presidential nominee, presumed to be former Vice President Joe Biden, for use in planning to take the reins of power in the event of a November win. That's one of the details of, I'll be right back, folks. Give me one moment. I'll be right back. I'm back. All right, as I was saying, and let's go back to our document here. The right here, it says, and as I'm reading this, pick up where I left off, and I'll start right here. I'm going to highlight it. The transition documents are required by law 6 months prior to the presidential election, November 3rd. They include a report on transition activities and planning thus far, and letters from the transition coordinator to the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee and the House Oversight and Reform Committee verifying the executive branch is complying with the law. The one-page report details 2 legally required transition councils, GSA's preparations to assist the incumbent and possible incoming administration before and after the election, funding allocations at upcoming meetings, and training sessions by various agencies. The Federal Transition Coordinator and Office of Management and Budget Deputy Director for Management will co-chair the Agency Transition Directors Council that helps prepare briefing materials for a potential incoming administration. The second council is the White House Transition Coordinating Council, which Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, will chair. Members will also include Acting OMB Director Russell Vought, Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations Tony Arnaudo, White House Counsel Pat Cipolle, Presidential Personnel Office Director John McAtee, and Federal Transition Coordinator Mary Gilbert, GSA's Associate Administrator. In the near future, GSA will meet with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Justice Department, and FBI to discuss the security clearances process and access to classified information for transition team members. Additionally, the Office of Government Ethics is, quote, training agency ethics officials and other stakeholders for a potential transition, emphasizing substantive government ethics and financial disclosure issues relevant to positions requiring Senate confirmation nominees, the report said. This year, 2020, is the first time the 2019 Presidential Transitions Enhancement Act, which was enacted to amend the 1963 Presidential Transition Act, will be in effect. The law clarifies GSA's responsibilities during administration changeovers, requires presidential candidates to publicly release ethics plans for their transitions before elections, and maintains each agency create a succession plan for every senior non-career position by September 15th of an election year. That should have been done. Quote, we're encouraged that these 3 critical stakeholders for transition planning, the White House, federal agencies, and the Biden team, are all taking this planning seriously, said Dave Marchek, director of the nonprofit Partnership for Public Service Centers for Presidential Transition. Quote, at a time of economic and health crisis, effective and early transition planning, regardless of who wins, has never been more important. Now, keep in mind, this is all May 15th, okay? This was released May 15th, 2020, right? Okay? Because today is November 10th, all right? Early morning, okay? The partnership, which serves as an informal resource for presidential transitions, stresses that a transition occurs regardless of whether the sitting president wins or not. Okay? Transition planning is just as essential, this is Courtney writing this, for an incumbent president's successful second term as it is for a new president's first term, the partnership asserted in an April report. Donald Sherman, Deputy Director of the watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, expressed some skepticism about the Trump administration's transition planning and noted that it was late in submitting the report, which was due May 3rd. Sherman also pointed to reports of, quote, significant ethics problems among some of the White House Transition Coordinating Council members. Quote, the administration is not off to a great start, he told government executive. The president has routinely undermined agencies like the OEG, and the Office of Personnel Management that are critical to the process. And there's obviously significant questions about whether the president has corrupted the Department of Justice and GSA, which are also critical agencies in this transition process. And that is where this post ends. All right. Again, folks, this was May 15th. Government Executive, May 15th, 2020. What does this tell you and me? It tells you and I that the president and his people were planning to slow down, if not block, the transition of power if they lost the election as far back at least as May. They had no intention of giving up the office. That should be mated with claims that the president, as Dana Bash said last week, deliberately asked for vote by mail so that he can then tell his supporters, don't do vote by mail, do standard, so that then it gives him the room to say that vote by mail is fraudulent, even if it isn't. Even if the post office, by dint of its own reputation, did everything it could to make sure that its responsibility was carried out. And you know how many people told you to get out and vote by mail, and how many people and how many organizations and companies had commercials and websites and all kinds of advisories telling you how to vote by mail. It became a cultural thing, an event. The Trump administration was clearly acting against that. And now here we are, November 10th, and they're unfolding the strategy because it's clear they lost the election. In short, they're trying to damage a key system of our American democracy. And if you take that this is all being done in the face of presidential transition law, then the Trump administration could be seen as flouting the law, as breaking the law. Their argument is we need to count the votes. Fine. But it doesn't say that counting the votes means you have to block the Biden-Harris administration from preparing for transition. Subscribe to Zenny62 and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com. Oh, by the way, if you want to see the URL for this, so you can read this yourself as reference, okay? There it is. Governmentexec.com, management 2025 Trump administration details, efforts support peaceful presidential transition. And that's the file ID at the end. That's how they do their little WordPress post, WordPress website. How do I know? Guess. Okay. See you all later, folks. Oh, and live long and prosper.